So, in this week of K-pop Racism, 2025 edition, our lineup includes pre-debut videos of the Blackpink girls singing or rapping the N-word, Kiss of Life taking their reputation out to the woodshed to meet a very nice 50 caliber bullet, and Young Posse being Young Posse. But if you need more specifics than that, a member, I don't know her name and I don't care to learn it, covered a song with the N-word in it, and instead of saying it, she replaced it with the word babe. Oh wait, no, that was the right thing to do, and also Stacy did it. Actually, she just said the N-word, but replaced the titular N with a Z. So, all things considered, it's been pretty fucked. But my video isn't really about these situations. It is, the response to them anyway, but I feel as though the incidents speak for themselves. I could sit here and explain why what these idols did was wrong, why it perpetuates racist slurs, reinforces stereotypes, and continues a long pattern of anti-Black behavior in K-pop. But at this point, I feel like it's a waste of time. Firstly, many people have already done so, and admittedly better than I ever could, especially on TikTok. It seems to be causing quite a stir over there, at least more than here on YouTube. Secondly, this is a very old rodeo we're watching. It's no secret that K-pop, despite being built on hip-hop and R&B, both music genres born out of Black expression and culture, continues to take without credit or consideration, and better yet, spits in Black people's faces over and over again. This isn't the first time, and unfortunately, I don't think it will be the last. Taking time to break down racism will only unfold in two ways. Ones that I've observed from people's, especially Black content creators' comment sections who are currently discussing this subject. One, you already understand the gravity of what these idols have done, and repeating the same explanation back to you doesn't really change anything. Or two, you are one of those who the message really needs to reach, those who don't see any issues with what was done, and will inevitably respond to any lengthy explanation with one of these extremely redundant comments. This was a decade ago. It's just a word. It's not that deep. And that last one got me to make this video. Somehow, we've gotten to the point where racism is not that deep. Or, if I were to give these people the absolute benefit of the doubt to their argument, none of the above examples are offensive enough to constitute racism and thus are not that deep. That is still fucking stupid, but best to avoid the strawman and go to the other's best argument possible. Having said that, I would like to cut this very brief and show a clip of George Carlin. If you don't know who that is, he was a very prolific comedian who touched on a subject I think is pertinent for the discussion I'd like to have today. Take a look.
I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms or euphemistic language. And American English is loaded with euphemisms because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it. And it gets worse with every generation. For some reason, it just keeps getting worse.
When seeing the discourse around the recent occurrences in K-pop, I couldn't help being reminded of this set. Now, George Carlin goes on to list examples, however, I do think I can do my own version of that when it comes to how stans deal with, or rather don't deal with, racism in K-pop. The conversations surrounding these idols have led people to start spouting nonsense in order to obfuscate what is clearly in front of them. Especially with the Kiss of Life situation. People are bending over backwards to call the live stream they had, which was basically the members acting out racist Black caricatures, as racially insensitive or ignorant, instead of the more apt description of cosplaying racist stereotypes. See, the "it's not that deep" phrase doesn't just appear out of thin air. It's the final product of a process. One where the language we use solely strips racism of its weight until it becomes something trivial. This is something I've noticed countless times, not just in K-pop or when discussing racism. It starts with framing. When someone says they're just ignorant, what they're really doing is rerouting the conversation away from accountability and toward sympathy. Ignorance becomes a get-out-of-free-jail card. Suddenly the discussion isn't about what happened, it's about how we shouldn't be too hard on them for it. The offense gets framed as an accident, and that alone is supposed to neutralize its harm. Then you get other phrases like, "they didn't mean it like that," or "it wasn't intentional," as if the impact doesn't matter unless the person delivering it had a villain monologue prepared beforehand. This kind of language again reinforces the idea that if no harm was intended, then no harm occurred, which is just not how reality works. If I was going 90 miles an hour down a highway and I hit somebody, I don't get off scot-free because I wasn't intending to run them over. Next comes the rebranding of behavior. Instead of calling it racism, we get vague euphemisms like problematic or tone deaf. All of this creates a cushion and makes the truth feel less uncomfortable to confront. And once all that groundwork is laid, then comes the dismissiveness. It's not that deep. Why are you making this into a big deal? You're overreacting. You're just being sensitive. And just like that, the narrative flips. It's no longer about the harm that was done. It becomes about how inconvenient it is to talk about it. This kind of language doesn't just minimize the situation. It conditions people to view Black people's reactions as something to be dealt with or silenced so they can return to enjoying the content as before. And let's be honest, if this were happening to any other marginalized group, we would not be seeing the same level of pushback, gaslighting, or performative apathy. But because it's Black culture being mocked and Black people calling it out, suddenly it becomes a debate. Suddenly, it's not that deep. But it is. And the only reason people are working this hard to convince themselves it isn't is because admitting it would mean confronting the fact that their support for these idols comes with a cost. It comes with the implication that racism, in their eyes, is not a deal breaker, that it's worth overlooking for the sake of a beat, a bias, and a parasocial attachment. Yes, I am going there. Because once you admit that what these idols did was racist, then the next question becomes, why are you still supporting them? And that's a question much more difficult for people to answer, and so obviously they don't want to. So instead they twist themselves into knots trying to argue that it wasn't that bad, that it wasn't racism. They don't want to feel complicit, so they gaslight themselves and everyone else into believing that there's no complicity to begin with. But here's the truth. You can't support someone and still claim to care about the people they've harmed if your support demands silence or dismissal of that harm. And that's what this whole "it isn't that deep" thing really is. A defense mechanism. A way to keep the illusion intact, that you can stand someone, enjoy their music, engage in the fandom, and still be morally clean, even when the facts say otherwise. But you can't have it both ways. You either confront what's happening, or you choose to ignore it. And if you choose to ignore it, then don't pretend you're neutral. You're not. You're complicit. But if we're being brutally honest, fans are often harder on Black people reacting to racism than they are on the people who caused it in the first place. It's the reason why those videos go viral, where a white person will walk up to a Black man, call him the N-word, get punched for it, and then suddenly the moral panic is over the fact that this man who didn't know he was being recorded gets ridiculed for reacting to racism instead of the racism itself. And everyone and their mother knows that a K-pop stan will let a K-pop idol get away with damn near everything. A K-pop idol can say a slur, mock a dialect, imitate a stereotype, it seems, and fans will fall over themselves making excuses, waiting for translations, and even deflecting blame onto the company. But let a Black fan express hurt or frustration, and suddenly they're the problem. Suddenly they're too angry, too sensitive, too negative. You'll see more energy being put into discrediting them than you ever will directed at the actual harm that was done. It's wild, because people will do almost everything to preserve the image of an idol they've never met, while completely dismissing the very real lived experience of the people impacted by the behavior that this particular idol has continued to normalize. And here's the thing, idols and groups can change. Growth is possible. But growth only happens when there is acknowledgement, when the harm is named, when it's owned. No one is saying an idol has to be perfect. What we are saying is you can't move forward if you refuse to admit that there is something to move forward from. To deny what's happened says more about you as a fan than it says about the idol or the group. Because now it's not just about what they did, it's about what you're willing to tolerate, what you're willing to excuse. If you want your fave to grow, hold them accountable. If you want them to learn, then stop shielding them from the consequences that make learning necessary. Having said that, from all of the content that I've seen coming out of this situation, it seems like a lot of Black fans are tired of this. They're tired of having to hold their faves and idols accountable for this kind of shit because honestly, it doesn't really seem like much has changed. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's noticed that a lot of people have been referring to, again, Kiss of Life's live stream as some second-gen level of racism. Somehow, it's 2025, but we're having this kind of resurgence again? Are we serious? So a lot of them are just giving up. They're done with K-pop, and I can't begrudge them for that. So most of all, if you're not the one being harmed, maybe take a second before deciding that the people who are should just get over it, or that they should accept a half-assed apology when and if one is made. So yeah, it's been a heavy week in K-pop, but honestly, this isn't new. It's just another installment in a long-ass series of people doing racist shit and others twisting themselves into Olympic-level mental gymnastics to pretend it's anything but that. We keep watching the same thing play out. Harm happens, Black fans speak up, and instead of listening, people start scrambling to use the softest possible language to cushion the blow. They say it's not that deep, people are just sensitive, that people are just blowing things out of proportion. But cushioning your idols won't make the harm they caused go away. It just makes people feel less responsible for their actions. And that's probably the point. That's probably the goal. Because if you admit something is racist, then you have to do something about it. If you admit your fave messed up, then you have to hold them accountable. If you admit you've overlooked it before, then you have to sit with that discomfort. And a lot of you don't want to do that. But here's the thing. Growth doesn't come from avoidance. Change doesn't come from comfort. You can't redefine racism out of existence just because it's inconvenient for your stan list. Idols can grow, groups can change, people can learn and do better, if they're given the space, accountability, and the reason to. But that can't happen if fans keep running defense, rewriting the narrative, and sanitizing the harm until it's unrecognizable from what they actually did. If you say you want better from this industry, then start being honest with what's wrong with it. Don't let your loyalty to an idol outweigh your basic humanity. Because it is that deep. It's always been that deep. And the longer we pretend it's not, the deeper it gets. So that was supposed to be the end of the video. It is the end of the script that I wrote originally for this topic. However, since then, some things have developed. From what I understand, Young Posse and none of the Blackpink members who were involved have released any kind of statement, which is honestly kind of predictable. Blackpink has never acknowledged any of the shit that they've done when it comes to the N-word or cultural appropriation, and Young Posse's whole concept is built upon rage baiting, so again, not really surprising to me that they don't acknowledge what happened. However, Kiss of Life seemed to release two statements. The first was from their company, and the second one was a handwritten letter from the members, I imagine after the company apology was not enough for a lot of international fans. I'm only including this section because I imagine people will want to ask me about this, and it'll fill up the comments section, and I don't want people to do that. First of all, I'm not gonna comment on whether or not I'm accepting the apology. It's not mine to accept. I'm not the one who was affected by what had happened. I will say I don't think it's a great apology. Again, just kind of avoiding naming what it was, naming who they did it to, what it was in reference of, that kind of thing. Both apologies were pretty bad, in my opinion. Anyway, that being said, that'll be it from me for now. See y'all later. Bye-bye.